This video I'm going to show you how to assemble the PIC Dev 14. First, let's take a look at the schematic. Make sure we have all the components we need. Next, we'll look at the PCB. It's a through-hole PCB, so the parts get inserted from one side and then soldered from the opposite side. It's usually a good idea to start with the lowest lying components first. So first I'm going to put in capacitor C1, flip the board over, and then solder it in place. When soldering the connections, it's important to get heat into both the pad and onto the lead. So have a little bit of solder on the tip of the iron, and then heat up the pad and the lead and feed some solder in from the backside. Wait till it flows out and you should get a nice little fillet. It's going to look a little like a little mini Hershey's Kiss. And then trim off the leads just above the edge of the fillet. Now we can add resistors R1 and R2. The resistors are going to need to have their leads formed to fit into the PCB. It's usually a good idea to use a lead forming tool or some needle nose pliers, but here I'm just forming them by hand. If you want, you can do them both at the same time. Here I'm just doing them one at a time. The trick to soldering well is to always have a nice clean tip on the soldering iron. And so what you can't see here is that I'm constantly cleaning the tip on a damp sponge or on a brass tip cleaner. And then I'm applying a little bit of solder onto the tip of the iron. And that little solder on the tip helps the heat flow from the iron over to the lead and the pad. It's one of those things you'll just get good at by practicing. All right, now we're going to install the 6-pin in-circuit programming connection for the microcontroller. We have a right angle SIP snappable header here, so we're going to snap off 6 pins, put the short edge into the PCB, leaving the long edge protruding out to connect to the programmer. Flip it over and solder that in place. Now we can add the socket. The socket is going to hold the microcontroller. And if you look at the socket carefully, you'll notice there's a notch on one side. You want to put that notch towards the programming header or towards the pin 1 location. That'll be a good visual reminder as to which way to install the chip each time. Now we can add the LED. You need to put the LED in the right way. Usually the long lead on the LED is the anode, and there's a square pad on the PCB to signify the anode. If the LED has been prepped, then there might not be a long lead. You better check and make sure you connect it with the right polarity. We can add the trim pod in and solder its leads. All right, that's all the parts that go on the top side of the board. On the back side of the board, we need to add some 7-pin SIP headers that will allow you to plug your board into a breadboard. So put the short edge through the PCB and leave the long end protruding downward. And then solder it from the top side of the board. All right, that's all the soldering. Now we can put our microcontroller into the board. When we first grab a new microcontroller or new IC, we're going to see that the leads are splayed out a little bit. So we got to form them, and then we can align it and press it into the socket, making sure pin 1 is in the right location as signified by the dot.